Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we're super happy to have you here. And if you've been listening and enjoying for a while, I would be super grateful if you would please take a moment to give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's one of the best and simplest ways to pay it forward and help others find the show so that they too can tap into the powerful perspectives and positive vibrations we are collectively emanating. The other unique and magical way to share this show is by sending any friends you think would benefit from listening to this podcast our Game with the Universe link at positivehead.com/game. Also listed in the show notes, which will serve them up a quote-unquote random episode when they click it. Just instruct them before clicking the link to close their eyes for a moment and sincerely ask the universe to cue up the episode that contains the insight and perspectives that they most need to hear at this point in their life journey, and then click to listen to whatever episode is synchronistically served up to them. I have heard time and time again from people about the incredible results they received playing the game. So just tell your friends magical results are guaranteed or their karma back. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's Soul Share episode, I'm very excited to have Dr. Josephine Hardman here with me on the show. Josephine is an intuitive healer, Akashic records reader, and host of the Inner Work podcast, where she focuses on assisting people on the journey of awakening, self-development, and spiritual growth. Sounds very familiar. Hello, Josephine. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this as well. And it's always fun to mix it up with another podcaster and
For sure. Yep.
share insights and wisdom. And before we dive in, I'd like to kick it off with my cliche opening question. And it is this. You're in an elevator. The woman next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You have 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Wow, that's the elevator pitch. So I would say similar to what my purpose is with the podcast. My passion is to be with other people as they awaken spiritually. I have learned over time that it's not my job or task or spiritual mission to force someone to awaken,
Yeah.
or to even try to fix anything for them or carry anything for them or try to heal them.
Yeah.
That's really not what being a healer means to me. So it's
Yeah.
just being with them as they awaken,
Yep.
maybe as a companion, for as long as they need it. So
Yeah. I mean, it's the old, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. And it's
exactly.
just sort of, walk beside them, gently nudge
Yeah.
perhaps.
Yes.
And, I think it's important for people to really embrace the process because,
Yeah.
I think, you've probably seen the memes of when you first start having your spiritual awakening, you're like, oh, this is going to be all unicorns and
Right.
rainbows. And it's like,
Yep.
no, there's some of that in there, after
Yeah.
you've done all the work that's in the, you get a glimpse and it's like, okay, now do the
Yeah.
work.
It's so true. And we're all, as you know, on a specific timeline.
Yeah.
So we can't get impatient with other people's timing or level of awakening or how that is unfolding for them. So it really is just about how can I be of service?
Yeah.
How can I be a guide a little bit in this moment and also learn from the other person because
Yeah.
we're all learning from each
Well,
other
yeah,
as we go.
we're all teachers and students simultaneously,
Yeah,
and we
we
teach.
are.
I always say on this show, we teach best what we most need to learn, and
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
and when I love what you said there. It's like everyone is on their own unique timeline. Their
Yeah.
comparison is a joke because it's
Yeah.
your unique emanation of source consciousness that is, doing its thing in its own time in its own unique way.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very important. Well, I'd love if you would to kick us off with just sharing whatever feels relevant about your backstory. I always,
Okay.
like to hear, how'd you get here? How'd you get on this path? And like I said,
Yeah.
whatever feels relevant of that journey to share.
Yeah, great. So as I was telling you just a second ago before we jumped on, I do have a little bit of a rare experience. I had a rare experience growing up that I grew up in a home with two parents that were spiritually
Mm,
awakened, and had very intense and well-developed spiritual practices of their own. My
mm,
dad had traveled the world and done transcendental meditation,
mm.
yoga, all of these things very early on. And then my mom is a healer and a medium and a psychotherapist.
Wow.
So growing up, we had all the books, we had the yoga mats, we meditated.
Mm-hmm.
So I was introduced to a lot of those things at an early age. And my spiritual gifts were encouraged, acknowledged, honored, which again I think is a very rare thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then when I was around 16, 17, my mom started reading about the Akashic records
Mm-hmm.
and seeing if that would be a modality that she wanted to add into her healing work with
Mm-hmm.
clients and for herself. And she found it really helpful and fascinating. So she said, "Oh, you might want to take a look at this as a resource and see what happens."
Mm-hmm.
So I did, and I started accessing the records for myself at that age, just for daily guidance, kind of experimenting with it, playing with it,
Yeah.
and seeing what came of it. And then over time, that practice and that relationship that I had with the records developed. And then I realized, oh, wait, maybe I can read for others too and introduce them to this resource. And then, well, that was really the beginning of the journey.
Mm.
But because I am a highly sensitive empath, I feel things very deeply. Always had this complex of I am a weirdo, I am abnormal, right? I am an alien.
All the best
I
people are
feel
weirdos.
I know. I feel things too much, so I try to retreat into the head, and kind of shut a lot of that down.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I went into the academic world and focused for many years on intellectual pursuits, got my PhD, taught college. But of course, that was not sustainable. Your spiritual gifts tend to like come back around at
Yeah.
some point, or just you get the knock on the door, the
Right.
spiritual door.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I started to feel in my heart, oh, maybe academia is not the place where I am meant to be, where I can, do my highest level work and give my highest level service to others. And I just started to feel like a longing, like a sense of grief. Maybe this is not the place, even though it was all going according to the plan.
Mm-hmm.
And externally, I was very successful, but it was just fueling my perfectionism and my approval seeking behaviors and wanting validation externally. Academia was really good for all of that. But again, just not sustainable. So
Yeah.
that's when I decided to finished my PhD, and then I left, and then I started my spiritual business.
Mm.
So for many years, I felt like I had almost like two lives, the spiritual
Mm-hmm.
life where I explored all of the spiritual dimension and all of these modalities and got certified as an intuitive healer just for myself. And then I had the other foot in the academic world, just living from the neck up is
Right.
how
Right.
I refer to it now. So ultimately I had to drop back down into the body, into my heart, and that's where I said, "Oh, maybe this whole spiritual thing can actually be my life's work,
Right.
and it can be the thing that I do every day." So I've been doing that ever since. I think it's been about 8 or 9 years now.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
And do you miss being a professor?
Oh, well, I still get to teach because
Yep.
I teach my Akashic Records certification
Mm.
program,
Gotcha.
which is great because I do enjoy like designing curriculum and then putting that
Mm-hmm.
together, student engagement, and then being able to teach. But now I just get to do it on my own terms, which is a lot better.
Right.
So,
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, let's talk about that curriculum some and the Akashic Records in general. I'm sure a
yeah.
lot of listeners are familiar. And
Hmm.
as I was telling you before we started recording, I started this podcast 9 years ago. or yeah, 8 years ago, I guess. And somewhere in there. And
Yeah.
the first guest that I had was my friend Sue Krebs, who's an Akashic Records reader. And
Yeah.
so, I've always been fascinated with the Akashic Records, and just
Mhm.
the concept of the Akashic Records, I think, is pretty fascinating. So maybe, yeah, you could just share, because I'm sure some listeners aren't even familiar what they
Yeah,
are,
yeah.
how do we access them, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I love that story. I am honored to be another guest
Mm.
talking about the records
You're almost to
on
episode 2000. She was episode 3.
Oh,
So,
wow, it's coming full circle.
yeah.
Yeah, so what are the records? And, I always start by giving a little disclaimer that it's such an abstract concept, so sometimes it can be challenging for the human brain to
Mm-hmm.
kind of get a grasp on this. But the best way that I have learned over time to define them is that the records are essentially a vast storehouse of information and energy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the way that we can try to understand it is that they're encoded in the universal energy field. So there's this universal energy field that sustains all of life, including our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and that interpenetrates all of us. This is the field through which we are all interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like an energetic grid, that is constantly humming all around us and even within us.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what we can see is the physical reality, which is just kind of a projection of that energetic
Yeah, right.
grid. So the records are encoded in that energetic grid that we can't really see with our human eyes. We can't hear it with human ears, but it is always consistently there. So, how we have to tap into that field is by opening up the intuitive channels and the channels of receptivity. So, we can see, perceive, hear the records through our third eye, through the intuition. So, kind of extrasensory perception
Mm-hmm.
is what we need to develop, which is not at all an exclusive thing. So these are not exclusive gifts that some people have and other people don't have. It's just a
Right.
matter of developing them. And we all have the divine birthright to be able to access
And I
the
like to kind of put it
records.
like this with intuitive gifts, just to interject real
Yeah,
quick, is, we can all shoot a basket and make a basket,
yeah,
if we practice, especially. And then
yeah.
some people are born to be Michael Jordan or Kobe
Right.
Bryant, so
That's
you'll
true.
have people that just have such a, knack for the particular gift. So I think there's
Right.
some truth to that, for sure.
Completely.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, completely. Um, And at the same time, as you know, and as I'm sure you teach people, there are practices and things we can do, to
Yep.
open up those gifts as much as
Absolutely.
possible.
Absolutely.
Um, so the records are encoded in this universal energy field. And also, what we really need to be able to tap into them is to drop down into the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So the heart can really open up, almost like the portals
Mm-hmm.
into the
Mm-hmm.
records. It's not a mental exercise. It's not like, oh, I'm gonna think my way there.
Mm-hmm.
Really dropping down into the body, into the heart, and then proceeding from there. And so the information that is written in the records is really vast. It's
Mm-hmm.
infinite.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way I look at it and how I've experienced it in working with clients, for almost a decade now, is that every time that our soul chooses to incarnate into a physical body and have a human experience for the purposes of evolution, development, spiritual growth, that's when a new chapter is created in each of our individual Akashic record, which is like a book inside of
Mm-hmm.
this vast library of the records.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we can go in and retrieve information about past lifetime experiences. Is there unresolved past life trauma or unfinished business that we might need to heal in the current lifetime? But we can also access information about the current lifetime. So, who am I really at my essential soul level? Why am I really here? What is high purpose or spiritual mission. We can also look at potential future outcomes, if we stay on a certain trajectory or make a certain choice, kind of to check in on the energy of the potential outcome of that. And there's so much more we can do.
Yeah.
It's really infinite. How vast this resource is.
Yeah, I think of it as like Google for the universe.
Yeah, it is.
God's
Yeah.
Google.
Yeah, some people call it the cloud because it's constantly
Mm,
updating,
mhm.
because as we heal things, as we heal patterns, as we heal past life contracts or vows, if we have those, or even ancestral patterns, then the information gets updated of our
Mhm.
individual record. So the Akashic records are not static, they're not fixed. This is a living, breathing entity, we could say. And as we evolve, so does our Akashic record.
Mhm. Mhm. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious for you, when you tap in, how does the
Hmm.
information come to you? Is it
Yeah.
clairvoyance, clairaudience, visual, audio?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. So it has changed and developed over time. That
Mhm.
too. That's part of how our individual relationship to the records kind of
Mhm.
changes.
Mhm.
Um, and as we open things up in ourselves, then that can change too. But for me, it is a combination of clairsentience.
Mm.
So clairsentience, claircognizance. I just know when I
Mhm.
go in. Let's say if a client has a specific question about something, and I can go in and I just kind of know, oh, this is the truth
Mhm.
for this question, or this is the most important thing that this person needs to know. So
Mhm.
just a very strong sense of inner knowing, and I do see images as well. But for that, I always, when I teach people how to access the records, I always want to be really clear that, for some people, they're going to see a perfect movie, right? And they see the entire scene unfolding, and it's really
Mhm.
clear and vivid, and it's like they're there. And then for most people, it's more like fragments,
Mhm.
or images that kind of cut in and out, or just one image and then it fades. Even though sometimes we try to like grab onto it. And that is still completely valid information. So, however it
Mhm.
comes in for other people, it's just like a word or a phrase that
Yeah.
comes in, or a memory that gets reactivated, or sensations in the body. So all of these are all the different channels of receptivity, and they're all valid forms of information.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. So you've been teaching people how to read and tap into the Akashic
Yep.
records for almost a decade. Is that?
Well, teaching, it's been probably like 6 or 7 years now, because I started developing the curriculum after having, significant client
Mhm.
experience, because I
Mhm.
do certify others, in being able to give professional readings to
Cool.
clients. So, yeah.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, and I'm curious, as you've sort of um delved into that realm, at length
Yeah.
for some time now. What has kind of been shown to you? I'm always curious. I've had a lot of
Mhm.
guests on the show, from Eben Alexander, who had his. You might be familiar with him. He got meningitis
Mhm.
and, had to pull the
Mhm.
plug. His brain was fried. And then he came back and, oh, here's what I was shown, how things are structured on the other
Mm.
side, and
Mhm.
so obviously a lot of times what
Mhm.
what I find interesting is whether it's a near death experience or plant medicine
Mhm.
or, tapping in intuitively,
Yeah.
a lot of the same sort of perspectives on how
Yep.
things are structured. Or I don't know if you're familiar with the book Journey of Souls. Um,
Yeah,
Really
I think I might
interesting.
be. Yeah.
Journey of
Mhm.
Souls and Destiny of Souls. I'm going blank on the author's name now, but he basically is a hypnotherapist who
Yeah.
took people through past life regression over 40
Mhm.
years. And then when they would pass, it'd be like, okay, now what's happening to you? And,
Mhm.
and he kind of documented very scientifically how things are
Mhm.
structured and these sort of soul pods that we're a part of.
Yep.
different,
Yeah.
colors that we use as we
Yeah.
evolve on the path. And so I just
Mhm.
find it really interesting. Anyone who spent significant time delving in, peering
Mhm.
beyond the veil, whatever their
Mhm.
modality is how, how you see it structured as it pertains to like various timelines or contracts and vows, or,
Yeah.
how our physical ancestry plays into it all.
Yes. Yeah, this is excellent. There's so much I could say. I'm gonna start with
Say it
how
all.
I yeah, yeah. Where to start? Um, so how one of the most important things I feel that has been revealed to me, we could say, is
Hmm.
kind of what happens in between lifetimes.
Hmm.
Um, which I completely believe and know. Now I just know it that with
That's like Journey of
100%
Souls, what
certainty.
it's documenting, right? So
Right.
you should definitely check
Exactly. Yeah.
those out. Those are
Yeah,
incredible
that's
cases.
amazing. Yeah. And those case studies can be so helpful to cement that like certainty,
Hmm.
that this is how things actually
Hmm.
are. Through the records, what I have learned is that our souls, once we leave the physical body and kind of
Hmm.
return to the non physical, which is just an infinite, vast space of unconditional love, non judgment, just like interconnectedness, all of the good stuff that I
Hmm.
can't wait to go back to uh, because it sounds so
Well,
beautiful and
everyone who has
peaceful.
a near-death experience is like, I don't want to go back. Usually,
Right.
it's
Yeah, I
because they
know.
love it.
Yeah. Um, so once we return to that space, what I learned through the records is that that's the space in between lifetimes where our souls are making conscious choices, orchestrations, agreements about
Hmm.
what the next lifetime is going to entail. What
Hmm.
are the lessons yet to be learned? What
Hmm.
are the challenges that need to come up again? And that to me, that's how I define karma, really. To me,
Hmm.
karma is just lessons and challenges coming back around once again because we didn't
Hmm.
fully get them or we resisted them or whatever it was the first
Hmm.
time around. And so there's this almost like a council of guides, benevolent beings that work with our souls at that
Hmm.
highest soul level, divine level, making all of these agreements. And I do believe also that I always use the example of my mother-in-law,
Hmm.
which I hope it's not to be judgmental or anything, but because I always say to my students, well, sometimes in between lifetimes, our souls will be orchestrating all of this, and they might say something like, okay, in the next lifetime, who's going to play the role of the person that consistently triggers me or doesn't get me, right?
Hmm.
Or we just have completely opposite perspectives, and then we're going to engage in this like dance, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Where we both need to learn something, we need to let something go, we need to heal something. And I think my mother-in-law volunteered, which is really
A
generous
lot of times they
of her.
volunteer as the mother-in-law. It's like, I'll
Right?
not only do it, but I'm going to take the perfect role that's
Yeah,
appropriate to do it.
it's true. It's the trope, right? Um, so I think generously her soul at that level said, I will play that role.
Mm.
And of course, that's just, a very small example because on a grander scale, it might also be, a soul volunteering to play the role of a politician,
Mhm.
or a murderer or a
Mhm.
criminal of some sort. Um, so which we all have been in previous lifetimes. We've all played these different roles. So we've all been the victim, we've all been the perpetrator, and
Mhm.
everything else in between.
Yeah.
So that's where we are making those choices in between lifetimes about what is for the highest good and healing of all concerned. What is that plan? How is it going to play out? And then we come into a physical body and then we like forget
Yeah.
all of that, which is why we get so triggered when we're in front of that person.
Mhm.
Whereas at a soul level, we had decided together to do
Mhm.
that dance, but we
Yep.
forget, right? So
Yep. Yep.
awakening to me is really a process of remembering all of
Mhm.
that and seeing it from that higher. perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I fully agree with all of that, and yeah. To reference Eben Alexander again,
Yeah.
he talked about how oftentimes the the villain in your story
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
your closest, like
Oh,
your closest soul. Your best
yeah.
friends will often play the villain,
Yeah.
and another. You said something about like your mother-in-law doing it as a gift, and I think that's a
Yeah.
very wise perspective. I
Mhm.
had Neil Donald Walsh on the show recently, who wrote Conversations with God, most
Oh.
notably. But my favorite book of his is a children's book called The Little Soul in the Sun that basically
Oh.
tells this. Everyone should read it in 10 minutes,
Yeah. Yeah.
from 9 to 99. And it's a children's book, but it basically shows the whole story of this little soul that wants to experience this thing called forgiveness that is
Oh.
they've never heard of. And, it's this
Wow.
new idea. And then a soul steps forward and says, okay, I'll play this role, but I'll
Yeah.
lose myself in the process. And so
Yeah.
please just remember me as I am when I've forgotten
Oh.
myself in order to do
Yeah.
this thing for you. And it's definitely like tear invoking when you read it. It's like, because I think it strikes
Yes.
such a chord with all of us. Like, that's what's going on, And the
Yeah.
reframe of that perspective regarding the perpetrator
Yeah.
is like
Yep.
that they actually suffered to give you the opportunity to experience
Mhm.
forgiveness and whatever it is karmically that's going on there. It's like it's really beautiful
Yeah.
and intense.
That is powerful, and it also helps us to remember that, we are the villain for someone else too,
Yeah,
probably,
right. Yeah, yeah,
and we even maybe right now,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
we trigger someone else, right? But also to be able to forgive ourselves in
yeah,
that,
yeah.
and seeing that, "Oh, okay, it's not that we're doing any of these things to each other, like, on purpose to be malicious.
Hmm.
It's really that we made those agreements,
Yeah,
to work stuff out together."
yeah, totally. And it's
Yeah.
funny because eh, I find myself to be pretty sensitive. My intuition has gotten pretty sensitive with like when there's a significant connection or
Yeah.
potential past life,
Oh, yeah.
slash future. I mean, I think the future
Yeah.
affects the now the same way the past affects the now, right?
Completely,
Because
yeah.
we
Mhm.
are in a timeless state.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's all happening on a different channel, if you will. I
Yeah.
believe, and so it's like, I've seen it time and time again where I like, okay, what is it with this person? I can just feel stuff, and
Right.
sometimes where it's like I feel triggered by their energy or they seem triggered by my energy for
Mhm.
no apparent reason.
Mhm.
It's just like, well, I
Mhm.
don't know, something about them, and then a lot of times it's once I get to know them, then it kind of like clears itself and then it ends up
Mhm.
being like a great friendship or whatever. And I see this pattern of, a lot of times. Um, yeah, I mean, a story that comes to mind, there's someone, me and my partner run a co-living space here. Um, in LA, we call the Mystic Manor, and we do events, and
Yeah.
it's a big place. About 10 people live here, and someone moved in recently, and before my partner even met this person, I'm like, I don't know, something with you and him. I can feel the threads of
Oh,
connectivity, and then it
yeah.
goes into like as they get to know each other, it's like she has this crazy vision of a past life where her child was, she was a Native American and he was killed in battle. And then she's telling him this story and he starts like choking and like passing out at the same
Oh,
moment in the story that's what's kind of happening to her son. And then they
yeah.
both find out they both, when they were much younger, got in trouble and they both have one went to jail the same day the other one celebrates as their freedom day and like all these different like
Yes.
just overlap threads, and it's
Yeah.
just
That's
fascinating
amazing.
to see
Yes.
how it can weave back in, and it's like
Oh,
I felt it before they even like, hey, you guys need to meet, and then it's like
right.
it's really interesting.
Yeah, well, see, that's sometimes I do think that can point to unfinished business
Yeah,
from a
for sure.
previous lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes it's, as you were saying before, the soul groups or the soul
Mm-hmm.
families. So just people or souls that are meeting once again, but in human form, not
Mm-hmm.
remembering already the
Mm-hmm.
human experiences that they had together in a previous
Mm-hmm.
lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
But again, all of it just coming together maybe a second time or a millionth time, right? For
Yeah.
the purposes of healing whatever still remains to be
Yeah.
healed, or to shift that relationship to the next level, whatever it might be. But I do think we tend to meet those same souls over and over and over
Yeah.
again. Yeah,
For
and never
sure.
by accident. Yeah.
Yeah, I had another person that had lived here a while back, and they had my birthday, and
Oh,
I have a lot of synchronicity. It's my dad's birthday and grandmother's birthday, and great grandmother died on that day, and it's like a 10-minute story if I tell you all the things. It's like,
yeah.
and here comes this guy with my birthday, and he ends up being the most challenging person. It was like super karmic feeling, and
Yeah.
on crack,
Oh, yeah.
not on crack, but
No, I know,
definitely
I know.
some mental issues going on, and it's
For
so
sure.
triggering. And then I remember I was going to actually let this place go over this person because I just had to get away from him. It
Oh,
was so bad; they were disrupting and wouldn't leave. And then I realized I had the realization: oh, if I get the message, if I
yeah.
learn the lesson from this
Yep.
soul that I'm obviously very connected to, then it will naturally correct it. I don't need to figure out
Yep.
how to get him out, or like I need to learn what I'm supposed to learn from the lesson, and then
Mhm.
it takes care of itself. Because the
Yes.
universe is efficient, I believe. It's like it's bringing us together for the opportunity for growth in all things,
Yeah.
relationships, you name it. And when the
Mhm.
opportunity for growth has realized itself, and natural separation occurs. And I think in romantic
Yep.
relationships, that's a lot of times why there's all this pain, because our human gets attached, but really we've learned
Yeah.
what we're meant to learn from that and move on to other
Yes.
lessons. And so in this case, I'd like literally like, okay, I'm gonna let this go, and and over this person. And then I was like, and
Yeah.
then right on the back of that, I was like, hold on, if you get the lesson, he'll leave on
Yeah.
without you
It's
needing to shut
true.
everything down. And that's exactly what happened. I figured
Wow.
out how to navigate with them in a way that wouldn't trigger me into the
Mhm.
same sort of energy that they were projecting. And all of a sudden, oh, a new opportunity came in. I'm out of here.
Mhm.
This is great. My idea to leave, I'm gone. And the
Yeah.
day that he left, um, you know, typically, I mean, this winter has been very unique for Southern California, more rain and weather than ever. But typically, it's we don't get a lot of intense, dramatic weather like you do in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
And the day that he left, it was like a tornado hit. I mean, it wasn't a tornado,
Oh.
but like it was such an intense like hail and wind and stuff that it blew all these things off my balcony. And I was an hour away at my parents' house, and I could see on our cameras, like people were like,
Oh,
"Whoa, we
no.
thought the house was going to blow down." The
Yeah.
people that were here, and it was like where I was at an hour away, it was sunny and normal, and
Oh, there you
and it's
go.
like I felt like I cleared like lifetimes of
Yes.
whatever with this soul. It's like, oh, I finally passed the test of
Yep.
not continuing our karmic dance of you know
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
and then it's like it's like a vacuum. It's like
Yeah.
and literally physically there was a representation of that right after he left. It
Wow.
was wild.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
such a good story because it emphasizes how much the inner work is really the key
Yep.
to working through the triggers, and instead of blaming, judging the other person or putting it on them or why are they doing
Yep.
this to me, going into a place of victimhood, just
Yep.
taking ownership of what am I bringing, what is
Yep.
getting triggered in me, what is the
Mm-hmm.
inner work I can do here to be at peace regardless of
Yep.
whoever's around, whatever's happening, whatever the external
Y-
circumstances are. And
Yep.
then it tends to solve itself, as you say, with the assistance of the universe. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really a wonderful thing to behold, right? The whole
Yeah.
thing. And now, I talk to this person from time to time. There's no ill will. It's like, I mean,
Right.
there's some mental health stuff there, issues there for sure. And so it's like, oh, I see this person through that lens. I have such a soft spot for them because
Right.
despite all the dysfunction, there's like such a big heart
Mhm.
there. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's like, you know, my
Yeah.
special,
Yeah, it
special
is.
little for brother or something. It's like,
Yes. Well, it's a teacher for you,
mm-hmm,
right? Really,
right,
like a spiritual teacher at the highest level. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely, definitely was an interesting example
Yeah. I
of
like
all of
it.
this for me. Yeah, it was a good one. Before we continue on with today's episode, I'd like to take a quick moment to tell you about our sponsor, Talkspace. As a listener of this podcast, you know it's important to prioritize your mental health and wellness because when you work on yourself, you'll start to see and feel positive changes in all areas of your life. When it comes to getting help via therapy, Talkspace makes it super convenient to get affordable mental health care from the comfort of your home that's in network for most insurers. Your therapist can help you set and achieve your goals, and you don't need to wait until something goes wrong in your life to work with someone. Talkspace is there to help with any specific challenges you might be facing. It's the #1 online therapy platform with thousands of licensed therapists trained in over 40 specialties, including anxiety, depression, relationships, and more. And as a listener of this podcast, you'll get $100 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/positive. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/positive to get $100 off your first month. That's Talkspace.com/positive. I'm curious what, um, as you have dove in and seen, so let's take that example. There's
Yep.
definitely a soul contract there that,
Mhm.
to grow and like karmic,
Yeah.
you know, karmic ties and a contract. And so I'm curious, I hear people talk sometimes about like, oh, actually I have contracts, but I want to revoke them,
Yeah.
or I have a vow,
Mhm.
with someone. So I'm curious what you've seen, you
Yeah.
know, in your work pertaining to that whole concept of soul contracts and
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah, yeah, the
changing them once you're
contracts.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Um, so there's an important distinction that I tend to make when I work through the records between what I call soul level agreements. So
Mm-hmm.
a soul level agreement is an agreement that our soul is making in between lifetimes
Mm.
at a
Okay.
high conscious intentional level
Mm-hmm.
for, as I said, the highest good and healing of all concerned.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the soul level agreements where like you meet someone and it feels like, oh, I've known this person my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
It feels so easy to be with them, or what can we co-create together? So it just
Mm-hmm.
feels more effortless. So those are soul level agreements. Typically, we want to leave those in place. And then there are more of the karmic contracts or past life vows that we've made. So these are more of the problematic contracts. And
Mm-hmm.
those, they are problematic because we make them in a previous lifetime or even the current lifetime, but we make it from a level of, just being a human. We're not
Right.
making it at a soul level. So
Interesting.
as a human, in response to some kind of trauma, negative experience, loss, some overwhelming feeling that I wasn't able to deal with, whatever it was, we make these contracts in reactivity to that,
Mm-hmm.
as a
Mm-hmm.
reaction to that. So, for example, the classic example I always give is, let's say that someone in a previous lifetime was a healer, a mystic, a visionary of some sort, a witch perhaps, and they were condemned for it or imprisoned, cast out, killed. So there is this significant trauma
Mm-hmm.
related to being spiritually open or having spiritual
Mm-hmm.
gifts or being intuitive or being able to see things. Therefore, at an unconscious level, we make this almost like a choice of, I will never be intuitive again.
Yeah.
So those would be like the actual terms of the
Mm-hmm.
contract or the
Mm-hmm.
vow. So I am shutting down my intuition forever in order to stay safe.
Mm-hmm.
And then we tend to carry that over into the next lifetime because these things are just, ingrained in the DNA, and we're not
Mm-hmm.
conscious of them. So we just keep carrying them over until we do become conscious of them. And then we, through the free will and our power of choice, we can say, oh, I don't want to experience that
Mm-hmm.
anymore, of being shut down in that way or whatever it might be. So that's when we can do a process of revoking the contract. And we
Mm-hmm.
also very often have problematic contracts and vows with other people. So let's say something like, I will never make more money than my father,
Mm-hmm.
or I will never outshine my sister, friend, mother, whoever. Because if, or whenever I'm around this person, I will never speak my truth because
Right.
it is inconvenient for them or it makes them uncomfortable or
Right.
whatever it might be. So we can revoke those as
Mm.
well. And that tends to shift the relationship, either that it dissipates or that it transforms into a healthier situation for everyone
Mm-hmm.
concerned.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So it's kind of soul level agreements and then
Yeah,
karmic level
exactly. Yeah.
agreements.
Yeah, I see
Interesting.
those as the two big categories that the records clarified
Mm-hmm.
for me. And now sometimes with soul level agreements, it's not that they're always going to be pleasant, because sometimes they're not. We might have a soul level agreement, for example, to have some kind of physical illness in the
Mm-hmm.
next lifetime if our soul is making that decision because we
Yeah.
need that for our highest growth and evolution
Right.
or for our spiritual awakening, then that's what we are setting out to experience the next time. So a soul level agreement doesn't mean, oh, it's always going to be like cushiony and pleasant and easy. That's not, it can still be a real challenge. But it is a challenge that our soul has set forth for us
Yeah.
to move through.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Yeah. So I'm curious, as you've sort of delved in to the records, um, this idea of what you think and see regarding timelines
Yeah.
and potentials, and,
Mhm.
even, if you've done any sort of peering into potential future timelines, just any
Yeah.
of, and all of
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. Well, as you know very well, in the records, time is not linear.
Right.
So there are no constraints, as far as the way that time operates in the human dimension, that doesn't exist inside of
Mm-hmm.
the records. So everything there is happening simultaneously. So
Yeah.
past, present, future, all potentials, parallel lifetimes, just the whole thing. We could even access. Sometimes I have clients and they are what I call interplanetary souls.
Mm.
So they do not originate in planet Earth, and their
Hmm.
souls are actually from some other place in the galaxy or the galactic
Mm-hmm.
system.
Hmm.
Which is a cool thing because, and that tends to be a lot of the people that feel like an alien or a
Mm-hmm.
weirdo, or I don't really belong here on Earth, or I don't understand how Earth functions, I don't understand politics or money, these kinds of things. Um, so sometimes we can go in and discover, oh, yeah, that makes sense because actually your soul originates from this other place. And but you decided to come to Earth for these reasons, right? Or
Right.
to share these gifts so people can get a clearer sense of why they're here, which can help kind of to anchor them a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more. But anyway, so time is not linear inside of the records. Everything is happening simultaneously. So we can drop into previous lifetimes and we can go in and actually meet with our past life selves,
Mm.
which is a really amazing healing process that we can
Wow.
do in
Yeah.
the records, which I use very often. If people are coming in with a challenge or a recurrent issue or a pattern that they're trying to heal, and they just can't make any headway no matter what they've tried. Like they've done the talk therapy, they've done the acupuncture, they've done the Reiki, the self Reiki, and seen healers, but it's still kind of there. So typically that means, oh, maybe we do need to do some past life healing work. So we can go in and meet with the past life version of ourselves that first had this problem or this pattern or this issue, and
Mm-hmm.
then see, okay, how do we need to heal that and release it now? What did we not learn back then that we were supposed to learn, which is why it is still a recurrent issue. And so by doing that, of course, we're effectively changing the present and we're changing the future
Mm-hmm.
potentials because now,
Mm-hmm.
the person is being transformed in the
Yeah.
process.
Right.
So we can integrate that past life self back into ourselves. If they had any gifts that were important, we can reactivate those now. We can release the trauma. And then we can also check in and see, for example, let's say that someone wants to make a really important decision or they're at a crossroads in their life. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
like moving to another country or something. And there are multiple choices of what they could decide to go with. So something we can do in the records is to kind of pretend we've already made a certain choice.
Mm-hmm.
So if I choose, yeah, I'm going to move out of the country to this particular place, and then we can kind of hold that choice in our
Mm-hmm.
bodies, in our minds, and then go into the records and ask, what how does the energy of this feel? Is
Right.
this choice in alignment with who I really am at my core level self? And also, let's say 6 months down the line, 5 years down the line, what is the picture of this choice? So how does it look? How does it feel if I put myself there? So we can do that, and then we can do it with a different choice, and then just kind of compare and see
Mm.
what feels most aligned. Now, the important thing is the records are never going to make the choice for us
Right.
because they will never allow us to give our power away to
Right.
them in that
Right.
way.
Right.
But that's why they're such an amazing resource just to gather the information. So do some detective work and see what comes up. So they're going to give us all the information we need to make an informed choice, but then it's really up to us to actually do that, take the action steps. Because yeah, the records will never say you should do X, Y, and Z or you
Right.
shouldn't
Right. Right.
do, right? That's just not something that they do. And if we try to ask, should I do this? Typically the doors just close and we get
Right.
kicked out.
Right.
Um,
Wrong
yeah, we're not
question.
gonna see anything. So yeah, you have to rephrase the question and come back again later. Yeah.
Have you done any sort of perceiving of the potentials for collectively, like mankind, planet Earth,
Oh,
etc.?
yeah. I just because of my sensitivity and because sometimes I still do sometimes have anxiety, um, patterns, which has been a lifelong thing for me, so I try not to see too far ahead into the future, because then
Yeah.
I'll just get, like, caught up in it.
Yeah.
Um, but I do see in terms of what a lot of what they show me are the requirements of, like, what is required to move into the most ideal timeline for the collective, and also in terms of, like, phases of healing work that are cycles of healing work that are required for individual clients that I see and then for the collective. And then I also can see when those cycles sort of come to an end and then a new cycle begins. So I can see some of those things and then, guide people with the instructions that the records give me. And then, of course, the records love to give individual people kind of spiritual tasks,
Mm-hmm.
or to really get clear about what is their spiritual curriculum for this lifetime, and then how does that merge into the collective spiritual curriculum that we're all kind of working our way through, at different levels, and again, that's okay because everyone is on their timeline, as we were
Yeah.
saying before. Yeah.
Right. 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 Um, do you believe that all possibilities, or perceive that all possibilities play out? So, from this moment forward in time as we
Yeah.
speak, there's so much questioning and unknown around, you know, calamity and nuclear
Oh,
fallout, and
yep.
then you have so much potential of us stepping into mass awakening, and
Yeah,
so many people
I
are coming
know.
online, remembering, re-dash membering, coming back together with you
Yeah.
know and so my beliefs and personal perspective is source plays it all out. It's all
Mhm.
it's all happening. We get to
Mhm.
individually choose which version and timeline we step into based off of our. So even though a lot
Yeah.
of times I think it feels so much bigger than us, right? Like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, I can never control what Russia's going to
Right.
do, or,
Yeah.
what's going to happen with, all these crazy political things. And,
Mhm.
and then where it's really empowering for me is like, yeah, and every possibility you can think of and those you can't get played out because Source is
Mhm.
infinite. It wants to
Yep.
experience all potential timelines. And I actually have all the power to choose which version I step into
Yes.
personally. Like I'm
Mhm.
literally, as Bashar kind of talks about it, we
Mhm.
we are phasing in and out of timelines constantly, like
Mhm. Mhm.
thousands of times a day, based off of our energetic and vibrational offering. So I'm curious
Yeah.
if that's a
Oh,
perspective that
yeah.
you share.
Yeah, I do think, and I think very much so, that it is like a moment by moment work that we
Mm-hmm.
have to individually do, of asking, how do I align? Well, to me, a lot of it is like openness and surrender to being in that highest level timeline for myself and everyone else involved that I might, influence, or anyone who's in my life, or if we're interacting in some way. So allowing each moment to unfold to its highest potential, which means that I have to show up to that moment in a particular way if I want that
Mm-hmm.
to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, letting go of rigid plans a lot of the time is involved in that, or
Mm-hmm.
predetermined ideas of how something is supposed to go or should go. Letting go of the
Mm-hmm.
shoulds is
Stop shitting
huge.
on everyone.
Yeah. And on yourself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so letting go of the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, letting go of judgments of self and other expectations, um, yeah, of how things are supposed to go, and then just showing up as present as we can be, and kind of as peaceful and centered in ourselves and as authentically as we can be. Because I do think the more authentic we are and the more aligned with our own truth,
Mm-hmm.
then that really does open up the highest, most aligned timelines that we can experience.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it also gives other people the freedom to be authentic too. So it just helps, on a collective
Yeah.
level. Yeah, but it is a moment by moment choice that we have to make, of how do I want to show up in this moment, in the next moment? What am I
Mm-hmm.
going to allow to unfold, with
Yeah.
what I am bringing? Yeah.
Very, very fascinating, this dance that we're immersed in.
Yeah, it really is a dance. Yeah. Well, and you know what? That's a good word for it, because even though sometimes the inner work is really hard
Mm-hmm.
work, and we have to go to some places in ourselves that are painful, uncomfortable, shadowy, we don't want to look at them necessarily. It's not the most fun thing to do in the world, but it is still a dance, and hopefully we can find some
Mm-hmm.
playfulness or lightness, or laugh at ourselves or at the situation,
Yep.
because that can just really help to make the journey a little bit
It's
easier.
everything. It's like, bringing levity to everything with your perspective to the best of your ability. I mean, to
Yeah.
me, that's, it's encoded in the word enlightenment. Lighten up, right?
Yeah,
And
I like that.
you learn to lighten up, and it just shifts, the
Yeah,
lens. You shift your lens, and it shifts the experience.
it
It's
really
like
does.
Wayne Dyer said, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Yeah.
And it's such a powerful, it's really the, in such a wild world and universe, it's like
Mhm.
the only thing we really have control over, right?
Yeah, it really is. Yes, what we bring into
And
each
yeah, and the
moment is
perspective.
really,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. Yeah, how we're looking at it. Yeah, completely.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I would love, as we sort of start to wind down here,
Mhm,
to switch gears a little bit. I love, as the listeners know, hearing stories of synchronicity or serendipity or
mhm,
positive
mhm,
paranormal stories, and
mm,
I'd love to just hear any fun story time that
mhm.
things that you
Yeah.
have to share.
Well, I can think of a couple of things. Um, One thing, I don't know if it's paranormal necessarily, um, but I have been having a really wonderful time connecting with my maternal grandfather inside of the records. So when he
Mm.
was still alive, and this is something we can do in the records, is meet with loved ones who have
Mm-hmm.
crossed
Mm-hmm.
over, even though I wouldn't say that I am a medium, but that's something we can do. We can do mediumship through the records.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was still alive, my grandpa was like a staunch Catholic, very religious, not
Mm.
spiritual at all, did not believe in any of the stuff.
Right.
Um, and I'm not going to say that he was a miserable person because he wasn't, but he wasn't like a happy go lucky type of person.
Right.
So he suffered a lot in his life. And he always believed, eventually we're all going to be punished or there's like judgment day coming, all of these very
Mm-hmm.
intense things.
Yep.
Um, but once he crossed over, which was really surprising to me, maybe like a week after he crossed over, I was in the records and I was trying to see if I could connect, with him at
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
disembodied level,
Uh-huh.
because he had left his body at that point.
Uh-huh.
And at first, he came through a little bit, and it was this feeling of like disorientation.
Mm.
It felt like he was really confused at first about, hold on, there is no judgment, there is no punishment. Like, I'm just supposed to have fun over here on the other side, and it is just infinite love. Like, it wasn't computing for him.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So the record keepers, who are the beings of light who work with us inside of the records, the record keeper said to me, "Oh, we're just doing like an orientation for him right now.
Mm.
He's like a
Mm-hmm.
little confused. Just come back like a month later and
Yeah.
you'll be able to connect then." So since then, my grandpa on that side is like a completely different experience because
Yeah.
now whenever I connect, it's like freedom, love,
Mm-hmm.
playfulness. He brings clients to me, like he makes things happen.
Wow.
He helped me find the house that I would eventually buy with my husband. So
Wow.
it's just like all of these things that he is helping and guiding and orchestrating from the other side. So I like to tell that story sometimes to clients. First of all, just to confirm that, of course, there is like life goes on, right? So we leave the body, but life goes on, the soul goes on, it is infinite. And then also that just as like a comfort that sometimes the burdens or the suffering that we see our loved ones in while we are in a physical human body, that will be lifted, pretty
Mm-hmm.
instantaneously once they cross over, and that will be the same for us too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for me, just being able to connect with him in that way has been really healing as
Yeah.
well, because
Yeah.
it's a completely different relationship, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I had the opportunity to connect with my grandmother one time and it was similar.
Oh,
She's like, dancing like, oh, it's a very
yeah,
different experience here. I have none of the
exactly.
constraints and restraints. And
Yeah.
it's, you know, what a wonderful thing to realize, that those who, my own father is an example of someone who's got a lot of those same perspectives around like
Oh,
judgment's
yeah.
coming. God
Yeah.
is like my dad, and
Right,
dad is
exactly.
all about punishment, and
Yeah.
and then to realize like, no, that's not really how it works.
No, I know. Yeah. Well, and it's okay, for people to have their beliefs. Again, we're not gonna
Yep.
try to change their mind or lecture at them or anything, but I do think it's a comfort and a relief to know that ultimately the nature of the universe is unconditional love. That we don't need to punish ourselves or punish anyone else. We don't need to sacrifice ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really
Totally.
just about how do I express and embody more of that unconditional love while I'm in a human body and I have an ego and I have all this stuff that's like pulling at me.
Totally. Totally. Well, this has been awesome,
Yeah,
Josephine.
thank
I so
you.
appreciate you taking the time to come on, and I'd love for you, if you would, to just share, for the listeners, the best place to connect with you, your podcast, your, all your stuff, if you would.
Yeah, so best place always is my website, which is simple, josephinehartman.com. And then my podcast is called Inner Work, a Spiritual Growth Podcast. It's on pretty much every platform. And I'm also on Instagram. So the handle for that is at healer.josephine.
Great. Well, I do have one final question for you here.
Yeah.
And it is this. In 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life, according to Josephine Hardman?
To me, the meaning of life is that we all have this like unique seed or gift or talent or some contribution that we're here to make.
Mm-hmm.
And but we can do that in a joyful, playful, expansive way. And the more we do that and the more authentically we do it, the more that gift is awakened in other people in their own unique ways. So it's kind of it is a journey of co-creation, and also just collaboration. We are interconnected and we're all kind of walking towards the same place, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but we are, and hopefully we can help each other awaken and become more conscious along the way.
Mm-hmm. Well said, Josephine. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and share your insights and wisdom. And
yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah, likewise. And thank all of you for taking the time to tune in your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts. Until next time, journey well.